Okay. Good afternoon, bird class. How's everybody doing today? All right, so it looks like the image on the right is a little more popular for coloring. I'll try and keep that in mind when I'm picking images for this kind of thing. All right. More of that cartoony feel. Okay, I will keep that in mind. All right, so we do have a couple of things due this week. The quiz and the short answer question, which is actually this week an opinion question, which means it's very, very hard to get wrong. You have to basically not do it in order to not get full credit. They're both due Sunday, March 6th before midnight. And project topic requests are due at the end of this month, March 27th before midnight. And I want to remind everybody, spring break is coming up, March 14th through the 18th. So we have this week, next week, and then we have a week off. All right, so I did get some stuff graded. I did not get everything graded. I think the comment about I'm about to lose it is pretty accurate for a lot of us. You know, the pandemic has stretched. This homework is about using your opinions, yes. The pandemic has pushed a lot of us to the breaking point. The economy is not going well for people who aren't billionaires. And now we have a land war in Europe with a nuclear power. So I think we're all just trying to get through things right now. And I'm going to be a lot more generous with accepting late assignments because I can't keep up with things right now. And I know you guys are probably in the exact same boat. I see a lot of people agreeing with me in the comments. All right, but we do still have bird stuff to talk about. And we are in some pretty intense material right now. So we're talking about genetics. And I want to remind everybody of a couple of things before we really get into the new material. All organisms inherit one copy of each type of chromosome from their mother and one from their father. Each type of chromosome has the same genes in the same order. So we name our chromosomes with numbers. So if you've got 2 copies of chromosome 12, you got one from your mom, one from your dad. They have the same genes on them in the same order. Many of these genes have multiple versions, and these multiple versions are called alleles. Okay, so that's what I need you to remember before we move on. I'm going to take your screenshot if you need one. All right. So for most phenotypes, there are multiple genes involved. So we've been talking about dominant, recessive. We've talked about incomplete dominance, but that's not the whole story. We've been using budgie feather color as an example, and we've talked about blue versus green, and we talked for incomplete dominance about colors in chickens. If they've got a blue allele and a white allele, they come out kind of gray. But we have a lot more color options than just green and blue budgies, right? We have yellow, we have white, we have kind of purpley ones. It's because there are multiple genes involved. In humans, there are over 100 genes involved in skin color. There are a couple of them that are more major genes. So how much melanin you produce, what color that melanin is. Melanin is the pigment, and it can be kind of a dark brown, or it can kind of be yellowish. And so we have those genes, but we have a lot of other genes that also impact the situation. This is called polygenic. Poly means many, and genic refers to genes. So it tells you right there in the name, polygenic. So when we have polygenic traits, we see a lot of diversity. If we start thinking about skin color in people, we don't just have people with brown skin and white skin, right? People with brown skin can be very, very dark, very, very pale. People with white skin, same thing. There's no distinct line dividing that. It's kind of blends together between the different phenotypes or the different characteristics. So as I mentioned, most of these, there's just a couple of genes involved. So when we think about eye color in humans, there are 2 genes that have the most impact. One of those determines if the basic color is blue or if it's brown. The other one is, are your eyes light or dark? But we know there's a lot more than that. There are people with green eyes. I grew up with a friend who had yellow eyes. They were kind of greenish yellow, but they were still yellow. I mean, really unusual. So there's a lot more involved. When we look at budgie color, there are 2 major genes involved. And this is wrong. So don't write down these little things. Let me draw a little That's wrong. Okay. If you want to take a screenshot, now you can do it. I've hidden the part that's wrong. All right, so how does this work? How does polygenic genes, how do polygenic genes work? With budgies, the feathers, the little barbules, the little tiny threads of the feathers have color in 2 locations. One is around the outside of the feather structure, and the other place is in the interior of the feather structure. And it's the combination of these two colors that gives you the four basic colors of these birds. So if the bird has a yellow pigment on the outside and has melanin on the inside, their basic body color is green. If the bird has no pigment on the outside and melanin on the inside, their base color is blue. If they have yellow pigment on the outside, no melanin on the inside, they're yellow. And if they have no pigment, either the outside or the center of that feather barbule, they're going to be kind of white. So it's the combination of these two different pigments in two different locations. So we have two genes involved. Melanin is a pigment. So there's a couple of different varieties of melanin, but it is a common pigment. It's found in our skin and our hair. In humans, it tends to be kind of brown or yellowish. In birds, it tends to be blue, or at least in budgies, it tends to be blue. In other animals, there is a reddish brown melanin. It's just a name for a group of pigments. Does that clear that up? Okay, good. It's a good question. All right. So how are we doing with this concept? The concept that multiple genes can work together to give you the phenotype. All right, good. Glad to hear it. This is a very, very important thing to recognize. A lot of people get the basic dominant recessive genetics and miss the more complexity, the different ways genetics can work. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted you guys. Can I define phenotype again? Absolutely. Phenotype is the physical expression of the alleles or the versions of a gene. Phenotype is the identity. Oh, where did my identity of those alleles? So in this image, they've got the phenotype, which is the basic color, green, blue, yellow, and white. And the genotype, these dashes mean we only, oh, hush. We only know what one of the alleles is, because if you have the allele that produces yellow pigment, it doesn't matter what the other allele is. Yellow pigment is either produced or not produced. So the recessive here, these first two letters being lowercase tell you that's the recessive version of that yellow pigment. That is basically not producing pigment. The same thing with the blue. Capital letter tells you that it's going to make that blue colored melanin. A dash means it doesn't matter what the other one is, because our other option is recessive, which means no production of melanin. All right. I'm going to clear this, and we're going to move on to a couple of other little things. And I just remembered something. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is something called linkage. And linkage is when certain alleles of different genes tend to go together. What does this mean? If you have two genes on the same chromosome, they are more likely that the alleles of those genes will go together. So let's say, I am making this up. Let's say you have a gene for dragon scale color and a gene for dragon fire breathing, and they are close together on the same chromosome. So the allele for red scales tends to go with the allele for fire breathing. It's just kind of because they are physically close together, they go together. So they do not go together. Genes that are further away from each other on the same chromosome are not considered linked either, for reasons that are too complex for us to go into. We don't need to worry about that part. Basically, we just need to know that genes, alleles can move together. We can also see this. I do have a real yeah, I have a biology genetics lab that I have taught where we make dragons, although we didn't battle them. I think a computer game where you battle them would be a lot of fun. So I'm going to give you a real world example from budgies. So there is a gene for basic body color, that green versus blue. And there is a gene for how dark the body color is, dark or light. And generally speaking, the allele for dark and the allele for green go together. So we tend to get dark colored green budgies as one option. And the allele for blue and light color go together. So we tend to get light blue budgies. Now there are exceptions, right? We've seen a lot of that diversity. And you can see the dark blue budgies, they tend to look kind of purpley, but it's a less common color combination. Are you guys understanding? I know I didn't explain how exactly this works, but do you understand the basic idea? Okay. All right. Good. So if you want a screenshot, now's your time. A little confusing, but yes. Okay. It is a little confusing. The reason I'm talking about linkage at all, first of all, because it is important in budgie color, and we're talking about genetics related to birds, but also because there's something called sex linkage. Sex linkage refers to genes found on the sex chromosomes. So you guys probably have heard most mammals, sex is determined genetically by X and Y. If you have one X and one Y, we consider that male. Two X's, we consider that female. I'm going to tell you, but not explain. It doesn't always work like this. So just because you are XX does not mean that you are female. But for 90% of us, this is the case. Birds are also genetically, they also have genetic sex determination. But in birds, the homozygous condition, two copies of the same chromosome, the two Z chromosomes, produce males. And ZW produces females. So we use different letters in birds compared to mammals. When well, we're not going to talk about reptiles, but if you want to get into reptiles, a lot of them don't even use genetic sex determination. So alligators and turtles, sex is determined by the temperature in the nest while the egg is still developing. All right. And Nutmeg's driving me crazy. Nutmeg, say hi to the class. And now, just settle down. All right. Okay. So, genes can be found on these sex chromosomes that are not related to sex determination. So in humans, the X chromosome has a gene that's involved in being able to see the difference between red and green. So red-green color blindness. And we have on the X chromosome a gene that's associated with hemophilia. So those things, we have the same kind of things with the Z chromosome in birds. So if there is an allele that is always found on the Z chromosome, it will show up in female birds because they only have one Z chromosome. Now, if that allele is on the Z chromosome, there is a 50% chance the father will pass it to their offspring. The W chromosome always comes from the mother bird. All right, I don't have a good example of this in birds, but if we talk about color blindness, which is a recessive trait, XY males, if the X chromosome has the colorblind allele, they will be colorblind. XX females, if one X, oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. In XX females, they must have 2 copies of colorblind allele to be colorblind. And I just realized I'm typing it way over here on the side. Okay, take a screenshot so I can erase this and move this over a little bit. Oh, shoot, it erased the whole thing. Okay. Humans. Red-green colorblind is recessive and found on the X chromosome. So, XY male, if they have the colorblind allele, they will be colorblind. Females are XX in humans. If colorblind, they have to have both copies of the gene with the colorblind allele. This means if a female is colorblind, all of her sons will be colorblind. Because in humans, the male contributes the Y chromosome. How are we doing with this? Have you seen this sex linkage talked about before? Am I confusing you guys? I'm confusing you guys. Okay. Let's see, how can we do this better? All right, let me clear this and try again. And I'm going to make up an example in birds because we're talking about birds. So we have a male bird and a female bird. When they are having offspring, The male can either, well, the male is going to give a Z chromosome. It might be this chromosome, it might be this chromosome, but it's always going to be a Z. The female can either give a W chromosome or a Z chromosome. Or in there. So we look at this Punnett square over here. Here's the mother's chromosome possibilities, Z or W. Here's the father's chromosome possibilities, Z or Z. The offspring, the male always gives a Z, but the female can give either a Z or a W. So in birds, the female is the one that contributes the chromosome that determines the sex, which is the opposite of humans. All right, so now let's say we have a gene on Z, which causes, let's see, birds to grow teeth. So we'll call it tooth, and will be T. The dominant version is no teeth. Actually, the dominant version would be teeth. T. The recessive version is no teeth. All right, so you've got a male that has one Z chromosome that has the dominant version of the allele, and one Z chromosome that has the recessive version of the allele. And the female is W, which does not have the teeth gene, and Z, and we'll say she has the recessive version. If we do this in a Punnett square, the father's going to donate one of these Z's to each egg, and the mother is either going to donate a W or a Z. If she donates the Z, that's the recessive allele. I should have done that backwards, but whatever. So you would have for sons who must be ZZ, they can be one dominant, one recessive. So they got they got this copy of the chromosome. They're going to be one copy dominant and one copy recessive, because the other copy came from mom. Or they can be Z lowercase t, Z lowercase t, where once again, the lowercase t, Z, one copy came from mom, but now the other copy came from dad. Does that help? Okay. Good. Glad to hear it. Good time for a screenshot. Oh, I didn't make my slide. Okay. So why did we discuss this? If you ever decide to breed animals for the pet trade, or if you get involved in breeding endangered species, these kinds of concepts are important for you to understand. Do I expect you to remember them? Not unless you end up using them. But if you do end up using them, I kind of wanted you guys to have an introduction to these concepts. And now I'm going to give you the last couple of very important points. Most traits have multiple genes controlling them. So most traits are polygenic. Most genes have more than 2 alleles. We've really been giving examples with 2 alleles. But if we talk about, let's say, the disease cystic fibrosis, there are over 1,000 alleles for the same gene. And dominant recessive is the exception. So while dominant recessive is the easy one to understand, it's the one that we're all introduced to, most genes are more complicated than that. And that's genetics. Anything I need to go back over? I'm sure a lot of you guys feel like your brains are leaking out your ears. All right. In that case, we're going to move on and start talking about breeding. This is a California condor parent with a chick. Okay. So in birds, male birds often use color and songs to attract mates, which also attracts predators. We kind of talked about this a little bit in evolution. Now, one way to reduce risk is to form a group of males called a lek. So this is a prairie chicken lek. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 males. I'm not sure if these are males or females. They're not displaying, but these guys are displaying. So a lek is a common location where a group of males all display. The females visit the lek and choose among them who they're going to breed with. When we have a lek, the males, lekking males, just means that they're males on a lek, do not usually build nests or help raise the young. So they kind of show off, breed, and then they're done. If you ever get the chance to go see a prairie chicken lek, it's an amazing spectacle. It really is impressive. Okay, so that's a lek. Screenshot if you need it. Other males. Yes, it's like a bar with no drinks. Exactly. Other species, male builds a nest and uses his construction skills to convince the female to mate. And in those situations, the male does participate. Even in these situations, the female might come to a nest and go, okay, good job, but you know what? I want to make my own nest. I'm impressed with what you did. I'm going to mate with you, but I'm going to make my own nest. So the female will sometimes take apart the nest or modify the nest, but it's another way, in addition to singing, that males can attract females. This, however, is a bowerbird. We don't call it a nest because they don't raise chicks here. This is their display ground. This is the guy with the really expensive car trying to convince you to breed with him because he has a very expensive car. Bowerbirds are hysterical. Notice they've picked up blue stuff and piled it here. They've got some red stuff right here. It's hard to see on this image, but there's some black things here. They'll pick up natural items. They'll pick up artificial items. So like soda bottle caps that are bright red or white, they'll collect those. You can see he's got some areas under this constructed structure. This is a bower. So he's got some stuff in here as well. It's an art display. It is an art display. And if you come along and you mix up the blue and the orange stuff, he will spend hours fixing it. This is the way he wants it. Yes, it does take time. And by spending that amount of time on something frivolous, right? Just a piece of art, he is saying that, look, I am so successful as a male at finding food and avoiding predators. I can waste energy doing this. You want to mate with me because my skills are going to be passed on to my kids. And this is kind of the display of my skills. All right. So how often will females fall for it? Oh, in bowerbirds, all the time. It's how they choose their mates. Yeah. Bowerbirds are like the young women who are looking for a sugar daddy. And they are going to pick the guy that has the flashy clothes and the expensive car, because that's what they're looking for. That's the bowerbird. Well, the females will pick and choose. Yeah. So she'll come along and she'll look at this display and she'll go look at other male displays and just pick the one that she thinks is the best. All right. Yep, she picks the display based on her personal preference. Now, when we're talking about breeding birds and we think about all of these characteristics of males, like the bright, flashy colors, that's the norm. That's the majority. These guys, these are eclectus parrots. And it's another example of an unusual bird. In this case, this is the female, and this is the male. And in fact, for a long time, zoos and individual people would have these birds, and they were trying to get them to breed. Does this look like the same bird? The beak's a different color, the feathers are different colors. It wasn't until zoos started doing massive multi-species aviary, and one zoo put these two different species of eclectus parrot in the same aviary, that people realized that these were the same species. Okay. That was fun. That was fun stuff to talk about. But I want to go over the avian life cycle. What do I mean? I mean, what birds go through from the minute that egg is fertilized through sexual reproduction, through adulthood. So the avian life cycle starts with fertilization. This is an ostrich egg here. The hand is holding a hummingbird egg, and this is an elephant bird egg. All right, so an egg is fertilized. It takes 1 to 3 days to manufacture the egg shell. And then the egg is laid. Now, once the egg is laid, one or both parents will incubate. If it's only one parent, it's usually the female. Although, as we talked about in the ratites, sometimes it is the male. Incubation keeps the egg at an optimal temperature. And incubation lasts 2 weeks to 2 months. Smaller birds tend to incubate for less time, larger birds for longer time. If the female does all of the incubation, the male often will feed her on the nest. But it is common for male and female to take turns. All right, so that is fertilization to hatching. Everybody got your screenshot? Then the egg hatches. The baby bird has to break out of the eggshell. Many birds have what's called an egg tooth, which is a hard structure on the end of the beak to help it break out. The egg tooth, then it doesn't stay on the beak. Once the bird is out of the eggshell, it goes away. When the egg hatches, sometimes the baby is what we call precocial or precocious. You heard the term precocious before? Right. Precocious means it means well developed for their age. Or more mature for their age. Precocious birds are found in a lot of shorebirds, raytites, and poultry like chickens and ducks. Mary, go ahead.
Hi, doesn't it also mean that they're able to feed themselves as soon as they're born?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Precocious birds can walk and pick up food themselves from birth. Oh my goodness, you're so needy today. Sorry. He's just in a mood. In a mood. Best part about working from home. So that's precocious. Precocious birds are the ones that do what's called imprinting. What this means, it's how the chicks learn to recognize their parents, because they have to be able to follow their parents around. And most of the time, the first bird they see is going to be their parent. If you take chicken eggs or duck eggs away from their parent and hatch them in an incubator, you might be the first thing they see. And then there's a chance they will imprint on you and think that you are their parent. Okay, screenshot. We can use this idea of imprinting for captive hatched wild species. Now, the caveat here, the thing to worry about is you have to be careful they don't imprint on humans. Okay, so that sounds weird, right? So when you're dealing with a wild species that can imprint, and they are going to be released, you use puppets and costumes so they don't learn to recognize people. But when we're talking about birds that need to learn how to migrate from their parents, like cranes, they can be taught to migrate using ultralight planes. So you can imprint them on these ultralight planes. So they think that this plane is their parent. And this plane is used to lead them from the grounds where they were hatched, what would normally be the summering area for that species, down to where they winter. And this tends to be, this is done most in crane species, and in the US, the crane species spend the winter in Florida and in coastal Texas. And then they nest generally in the northern parts of the Great Plains or in Canada. There are a lot of cool movies about using ultralight planes to lead them. It's really, really interesting how we've learned how to do that. Now, I did mention, got to be careful they don't imprint on humans. Imprinting can go wrong. An animal can imprint on the wrong species, and that can cause them lots of problems. They can have problems deciding on an appropriate mate. They may think that people would be an appropriate mate. If we're talking about human-raised hawks and owls, if they are so used to getting food from people and they've been handled a lot, this is usually somebody found a baby bird, they raised it up. Oh, isn't this sweet? It's a nice pet. It hits sexual maturity and they're like, okay, time to go. We can't handle you in the house anymore when you're trying to mate with my head. And then they go flying around the neighborhood looking for food, and they literally will attack people and steal food out of their hands because they're used to getting food from people. So you've got to be cautious about this. This is one of the reasons that we have a lot of rules on wildlife rehabilitation with birds, because it does happen that somebody raises a great horned owl, a bird that could eat my sweet little cat. They're big enough to attack, kill, and eat house cats. And they will attack people if they're hand raised by somebody who isn't careful about it. Can a bird imprint if they are an adult? No. Imprinting happens within the first 1 to 2 days of coming out of the egg. Adult birds can become what we call habituated to people, which means they have learned that people are not that dangerous. It's not the same thing as imprinting. A bird that is habituated has learned that people are not the enemy, but they don't usually get confused and try to mate with people or steal food from people's hands. Imprinting is a very instinctive behavior that these precocious birds within 2 days of hatching will look at what is hopefully one of their parents and say, ah, that's what I am. I'm one of those. And I'm going to follow this one around because it's got to be my parent, because it's the first thing I've seen. There are, absolutely different dangers depending on age. And while imprinting is specific to precocial birds, you can get similar types of behavior in other bird species and even in mammals. So people who raise deer fawns, for example, who wildlife rehab them, they've got to be very, very careful that they don't get used to people and think people are a source of food and another deer, because an adult deer can approach a hunter if they're used to getting food from people and aren't afraid. Or the males sometimes when they hit sexual maturity will try and fight human males, or mate with human females. Was this on one of those Northwoods Law shows recently? Yeah, good. Okay, so that's precocial. If you need a screenshot, now's your chance. Now, this is what we tend to think about when we think about baby birds. Songbirds and parrots are born what is called altrical. This is the opposite of precocial. So these are less developed, eyes closed, naked skin. So that's these guys. These, you can see there are still some eggs. This is hatch day for these guys. And my God, are just hatched baby birds that are altrical ugly. I mean, that's just ugly. It's just ugly. We call these birds nestlings. So the terms you need to remember here are altrical and nestlings. Altrical species, the chicks stay in the nest. Mom and often dad bring food, mostly in the form of insects. So even if the parent species is a seed eater, they will feed insects to the nestlings. This is because insects they have more calories than seeds, and they have more protein than seeds. And a growing baby bird needs a lot of protein. Some species will swallow food and regurgitate. Some species will just carry whole insects back to the nest. Even if they regurgitate when the babies are really young, they'll end up bringing whole insects pretty soon. And of course, I've mentioned pigeons and doves produce crop milk. So nestling stage is between hatching and leaving the nest. So these are just hatched hatchlings, or just hatched nestlings. These are also nestlings here. They're a little bit older. Their eyes are still closed. They're starting to get a little bit more in the way of feathers, and you can see they're starting to get some pin feathers. But they also have, see this bright yellow here at the sides of the beak? That is called a gape flange. That allows the baby birds to open their beaks extra wide, wider than they'll be able to open them as adults. And it's often brightly colored to kind of give the parent bird a target for where to put the food. Okay, screenshot. The nestling stage lasts 2 or 3 weeks in songbirds. In raptors, albatross, and other physically large birds, it can be a couple of months. Once the birds leave the nest, we call them fledglings. We say they have fledged. So this is a fledgling American robin. Fledglings are about, oh, got my hands on the wrong spot on the keyboard, the same size as the adults. They have, they are fully feathered. I'm going to come back to this and say, except for the tail, ready to learn to fly. Now we can tell something is a fledgling by 2 things. One, they still have that gape flange. You see this, soft tissue structure right here at the corners of the beak. They can still open their beak wider than normal. And while they have wing feathers, they have a short or missing tail feathers. Fledglings are still cared for by parents. They have to learn to fly. They have to learn behavior, including their species song. They have to learn how to find food and avoid predators. I'm going to scoot this down. There we go. And their parents are still protecting them. This is the stage where baby birds are most frequently kidnapped or caught by cats. So they are very vulnerable. They can't fly all that well. They gotta learn how to do it. They gotta build up those flight muscles. So they're very vulnerable. The vast majority of birds that come into wildlife rehabilitation are fledglings. A lot of them are caught by cats. And if they are caught by cats, they do need to go to rehab. But a lot of them, somebody spotted it, said, this bird can't fly very well. I'm going to catch it and take it to rehab. And then the poor rehabilitator has to convince the person to take the bird back and put it back where they found it. People don't like to do that. They think it's better off in rehab, and it is not. It is absolutely not better off in rehab. We'll talk a lot more about that when we talk about wildlife rehabilitation. Now, how long the baby birds spend in the fledgling stage can vary dramatically. And some species need to learn a lot of things from their parents, and others don't need to learn much at all. Hummingbirds are very instinct driven, and they're on their own from a very, very young age. They can find food pretty quickly after leaving the nest. Things in the corvid group, like crows and jays, sometimes they spend not just this year with their parents, but next year as well. So sometimes they'll stick with their parents and help raise the next generation of babies. So this year's babies will grow up, stick with mom and dad, and help raise next year's babies. Okay, and that's the quick fledgling overview. So this is a good place to draw a line and stop the lecture. Are there any questions about anything we've talked about today? It's looking like a nope. All right, I'm going to leave this screen and we're going to call it a day. So I will see you guys next time. Bye.